Dustin Baker here on VikesNow. We are very close to the regular season. September 8th is when the Vikings go to New Jersey for a date with the Giants. But I'm going to go off script here today. So if you've tuned in for a regular show about the Minnesota Vikings, you might want to turn this one off because I'm not talking about the Vikings today. I'm talking about alcoholism recovery. This weekend, the day of Vikings Giants, marks 12 years of recovery for me, sobriety from alcoholism. And I haven't given this chat or this speech in a very long time from cover to cover. And I thought since I have this cool platform, inevitably there are some of you watching this who are either alcoholics or have family members who are alcoholics. And that's this guy. I am a recovered alcoholic with 12 years now in the books. And I think it is my duty as somebody in recovery to spread the word of how I did it in the off chance it could affect your life. So just bear with me. This is going to probably be a little longer episode than usual. Like I said, it's been years since I've given this entire speech. I usually give it in pieces when people ask about it. But this is how recovery works. I was so lucky that it worked for me in 2012 that if I tell how it worked for me, hopefully it can affect you, and especially how you might treat your loved ones who are suffering from alcoholism. You'll find a lot in chats about addiction or alcoholism. A lot of the subjects, topics, there are parallels between whether it's cocaine addiction, meth addiction, but I am talking about alcohol. I never dabbled in drugs aside from weed here and there while I was drunk, but alcohol is my drug of choice. So I want to chat with the group at length about how I recovered. Actually, this will be in three parts. It'll be how it was during my drinking days, how the recovery happened, and then how everything is now. So hopefully you can learn a little bit and go from there. So I'm going to start at the top. A lot of alcoholics have disturbing or troubling stories about their upbringing or childhood. I didn't have that. My mother provided a wonderful life for me, and so I don't have this big horror story to tell about my childhood and how I began drinking. I guess the only caveat that I would put on here is my father is an alcoholic, an active drug addict and alcoholic, and he was never around much as when I was a little kid because he was in prison most of the time. So I'm sure there's some psychological effects there that took me to alcoholism, but the odd part about the origins of my story is in high school and stuff, when everybody was getting off the ground drinking, I stayed away from it because I didn't want to be like my dad, who wasn't around for the most part because he was in prison because of alcohol. So I didn't drink hardly at all as a teenager because I was scared to end up like him. However, eventually in 2003, I was 19. I was about to turn 20. It was 2003. And you know what? I thought to myself, everybody else drinks. Like, I'm not going to end up that bad, so why don't we give it a whirl? So that's exactly what I did. I innocently tried drinking. It was a very strange situation. All we had was vodka. It was a friend and I. We were at my house in Minnesota, and we had Diet Coke to mix it with or chase it with. So vodka and Diet Coke, drink of champions, and drank that and hung out at my place. We had on this documentary about Mike Tyson. I remember it vividly on Fox Sports at the time. And slowly, like within the first couple minutes, the vodka, the alcohol started to really affect me, and it was wonderful. I remember thinking, this is the way, and alcoholics can attest that when you drink, everything becomes a little bit more interesting. So to this day, I look back on that Mike Tyson documentary and think it was the coolest thing ever because it was so fascinating, my first drunk watching that. But the main point of my first drink was I knew instantly that I loved this stuff. I didn't have any debates about, no, I knew the moment that I could feel what alcohol provided me, this is exactly what I wanted to do from here on out. it was my light bulb moment. And I remember it was kind of funny. The rest of that week, I would, talk to people like, "Hey, have you tried drinking? Oh God, it's great." And so, yeah, I was late to the party. I was 19, but from the minute I consumed alcohol, I knew then, and then looking back, it's so obvious that that was the drink for me. It made me feel, even that night, and then henceforth for the next 9 years, incredibly relevant, really important, self-righteous, cozy, warm. Those were all the adjectives that would describe how I felt when I was drunk. And from that night on, that was sometime in the spring of 2003, and my last drink was September 8th, 2012. I think there were about 3 days on the calendar where I did not drink. I drank every single night. And I did so, especially from, like, you start off small in 2003 when you first start drinking. You're not absolutely shit-faced every night. But I would say by early 2005, certainly until the end, I would drink to a point of blackout drunk every single night. Basically, my schedule was anytime I got off work, would drive home, and as soon as I got home, I would drink, and I would not stop until I passed out and went to bed. There were no nights off. If I wanted to go out and do something, go to a movie, go to a sporting event, I had to be drunk first or have somebody pick me up, and then I would be drunk while I was there. Alcoholics develop a lot of sneaky and deceptive and dishonest habits, and mine was always bringing a Aquafina water bottle with whiskey in it. So my drink of choice was cheap Canadian whiskey. At the time, it was usually about $11.99, $12.99 per bottle. I don't buy it anymore, so I don't know how much it is. It's probably more. But that was it, and it was straight consumption of cheap Canadian whiskey. And for the last, my goodness, probably 4 or 5 years, I didn't even bother, putting it into a cup. I would just drink it straight from the bottle. That's how miserable it got. And it didn't feel miserable at the time a lot because you were so fixated on when you could drink again. A lot of things emboldened me to drink during those 9 years. So I worked a full-time job at Sears in St. Paul, Minnesota. I was the manager of the parts and service department. And then at the same time, I was going to the University of Minnesota doing a full class load. Ended up getting 2 degrees, one in political science, one in history, both bachelor's degrees. And I drank through every single minute of both of those. Now, I never actively drank at work, but the moment I got home, it was, upsy daisy goes the bottle. So the only reason I mentioned those 2 things that were in my work and school is, as a young alcoholic, if you're getting A's in school, which I was, and you think you're doing a decent job at your job, you can justify and rationalize how much you drink. To this day, one of the most glorious feelings that I look back on is I would write, in my major, political science and history, all you really do is write papers, and your tests are blue books, big old essays you have to write. And when I would write a long paper, 20, 30 pages, I would do every speck of that thing drunk. And I'd get my papers back, and boom, they'd have a big sweet A on them. And you are completely emboldened when you know that you wrote a paper intoxicated, like really drunk, but you still got an A. You don't convince yourself that you have a problem with alcohol. So those were those accomplishments along the way that did nothing to derail my drinking. So as I began to drink more and more, again, it starts small, and by the next time you know it, you're like, oh man. You look at your bottle the next morning, and you're like, shit, I drank that much. Your tolerance starts to raise, and even though you're self-conscious about how much you're drinking, it just doesn't really matter because you think you're different, you're wired, you're special. All alcoholics think they're special. And that's exactly what I did. Even the consumption itself would really, really spike. You would just kind of tell yourself, this is the way that I am. So that's how it trugged along. A lot of times, folks, when they hear tidbits, they want to know how much I drank. I think because they want to compare it to where they might be or where their loved one might be. So I drank, those 1.75 bottles of whiskey that are usually between 12 and $30, depending on how top shelf you get. They're more than that if you get the really top shelf, but 1.75 liters. I drank 4 of those per week. Certainly not when I began, but towards the end it was 4 or 5 at the bitter end. The last month of my drinking, that's all I did around the clock was drink. But that was my amount, and when I look back on it, it was a really sad existence. I was telling my brother recently, the guy that I met. I didn't know I had a brother for 39, 40 years, and he is a recovering addict as well. Go figure. The stuff runs in families, let me tell you. I was telling him, when I look back on myself as an alcoholic, it's really sad to think about a really tiny existence that I had. I isolated. Even though I had friends and whatnot, I preferred just to be left alone to drink, especially when you get towards, year 3, year 4 of your drinking. You'd rather just sit at home and not be bothered because you don't want folks to be critical about your drinking. And I look back on that almost like it was a different person. And I feel really bad for that guy, and I have to snap myself back into reality. I'm like, oh, no, that's me. You don't need to feel sorry for your old self. But it was a real small existence, very lonely. There's a lot of loneliness with alcoholism, especially when when folks know that, oh, that's what he does is drink, so we don't want to hang out with him. But you somehow find contentment in it because the constant feeling of being drunk is always there for you. And that's how this is so dangerous is, you wake up. I never really got hangovers outside of drinking tequila. Of course, when I'd wake up each morning, due to the amount that I drank, I'd feel tired, thirsty for water, dehydrated, groggy. But I never woke up with an awful headache like like hangovers that you've inevitably had. I think my body just gained so much tolerance that was the way that it worked. Was drinking that much and success. So, a lot of the stuff that came along with the drinking career, and if you are an active alcoholic, or you feel like you might be, or you live with one, there is a lot of dishonesty, and it might just be petty dishonesty. For instance, while I worked at Sears, we always had like a new manager every couple of years. And every single one of those men and women knew something was up with me when it came to alcohol. Every single one of them down the line, probably 4 or 5, and like that was about 6, 7 years in that job. They would all pull me aside because I think they could smell it on me from the night before. They'd pull me aside and say, hey, everything going okay? I want to make sure you're not mixing work with pleasure. They would really beat around the bush to say, hey, we can smell alcohol on you. And I would lie to their face. I would say, I had hair back then. I didn't shave it like I do now. I'd be like, no, that's that smell you're talking about. That's probably just hairspray. Or I would say I used a lot of mouthwash this morning. Just lie through my teeth. Try to make them feel stupid for even insinuating that, I drink. I'd actually play dumb. I had one that was like, hey, you drinking today, buddy? One of my managers. And I'd be like, drinking what? Like playing totally dumb when I knew damn well what he was talking about. So you will find, if this is you personally or somebody you care about, there is a lot of lying that goes along with alcoholism. And you'll hopefully find, if you enter recovery, that becomes something that's easy to get out from underneath. You don't have to live in this cycle of telling others, hey, no, I got this under control. It kind of goes away once you enter a program of recovery, but there is a lot of dishonesty. And then you do that self-rationalization where you're worried about yourself, but then you don't care. There's this weird cycle that alcoholics have, and I was living proof of it, that let's say it's 8 p.m. on a Wednesday and I'm already really drunk as hell. You can convince yourself that you are the best human being on the planet. You are the coolest guy. You're going to call your cousin up or your mom up. You're going to call and tell them about how awesome you are and chat with them for a while. And you just feel on top of the world, braggadocious, really self-righteous. And then a half hour later, for no good reason, you could feel like you're the worst piece of shit on the planet who doesn't want to live anymore. Alcoholics go through this really wild roller coaster of self-righteousness and self-pity. We're really famous for pity parties. You probably know about the manipulation that alcoholics have. They have a way of dragging everybody down around them with those pity parties. And I was no different. So I worked at Sears from 2003 until I got fired in 2011 or so. I wasn't expressly fired for alcoholism, but it was like the hints were there. It was a really rough summer because I'd worked at Sears for so long. I started working at a gas station overnights to pay the bills. And that was not a great situation because if you work overnights and you are also an alcoholic, everything turns into one big day because you get off work at like 5, 6 a.m. and then you're going home to drink at 7 a.m. So you're doing all of your drunk transactions, calling people, and it's like 8 a.m. and you're already drunk as hell. That was me for about a year at Super America in downtown St. Paul. Eventually got fired from there. That was another spin-off of alcoholism. I think I got fired for profanity. Everybody that came in on the night shift was either drunk themselves or high, and so you could talk to them like you were at a party. Well, I got fired for talking to them with too many F words or something like that. But that was the catalyst that I needed. I got fired from 2 jobs within about 10 months, and naturally down and out. So I went home that weekend and drank and drank and drank. And another common theme for alcoholics is you usually find yourself, you end up in detox units or in jail. Thankfully, I never really went to jail. But for detox, I found myself in there multiple times. And there was this one weekend, let's see, would have been September, no, it would have been August or maybe July 2012, where I was drinking and somehow ended up in the St. Paul detox. And then whenever you get in there, you have to stay 2 or 3 days. And then I got out and I did some self-evaluation. I didn't want to keep ending up in those places. I think I actually took a day off of drinking, and eventually I called my mother. I was in St. Paul, that's where I lived, and my mother lived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is where I'm at now. And I decided that, I think I'm going to come there. I'm going to go there. I just got fired, down on my luck. Let's go do that for a while. Eventually, I agreed to move back to South Dakota. This is where I was born. My mother had been asking for years for me to move back, so I moved back there drunkenly. It was a total drunken decision how I ended up here back in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I stayed at her place, and that was when the wheels really began to fall off. It was drinking around the clock. I remember the 2012 Olympics were going on. And then one night, we went out with one of her friends, and it was at a bar called Gateway in Sioux Falls. And this guy had like a Vikings man cave at his place that he wanted to show me, and I was like, cool, let's go back there. And I drank and drank and drank that night, and eventually, this is the one of the climaxes of the story, I stood up from his bar in his basement, just had drank for hours straight. I was going to get up and go pee, and I got up and I fell into his fireplace. And I still have a scar right there. I cracked my head open, and that was the very beginning of my recovery. I had no idea at the time. There was a lot of blood. They called the ambulance, took me to a Avera McKinnon hospital. And they kept me there and stitched me up. I stayed the night there. That was September 8th, 2012. 2012, excuse me. And then behind the scenes, my family, my mom and uncle were doing this little thing called an involuntary commitment, where the state of South Dakota can IVC you and own you for 90 days. They knew that my drinking was out of control. And when I got to the hospital that night after hitting my head on the fireplace, my blood alcohol level was 0.688, and most humans are dead at 0.45 or something like that, and I was at 0.68, so they were able to determine, they got a judge to sign off on the fact that I should be committed for 90 days, which ultimately saved my life, and that was a product of my mother and her brother, my uncle. I didn't know it. I was stitched up, got the staples in my head. This was actually, I was in the hospital that week. The Vikings season started in 2012. I think they beat the Jaguars. I remember watching that, thinking I was about to get out, but I watched the game there nevertheless. Behind the scenes, my family was doing the involuntary commitment. And when I was going to leave that Monday, it was, all right, sweet. Thanks for stitching me up, boys. Appreciate it. But what they were doing was putting me in a van and taking me to detox in Sioux Falls. So I walked into that detoxification unit blowing zeros because it had been about 48, 72 hours since my last drink. And I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Well, they were waiting for a treatment bed for me to open up in Yankton, South Dakota. Was not a fan of that at the time because I didn't think I had this huge problem. One thing that an alcoholic like myself will always do is, since I did not use drugs, I thought, honestly, in my mind, that drinking, just fine. Like, that's all I do is drink. I don't do this hard shit like some of you guys do with the pills and the meth. Therefore, my addiction is better. I don't need any type of help when I want to quit drinking. This stuff is legal, by the way. You can drink. I buy this stuff legally. I will do it. But that's not how it worked. Addiction is addiction. So behind the scenes, the IVC indeed stuck. I had to wait at detox for about 2 weeks before I could be taken down to Yankton for treatment, and that sucked because you got to see new drunk people come in each night, and you were very jealous of them being drunk and not you. For historical context, I remember being in detox, the game that the Seahawks and Packers played, and the Packers had was it Doug Baldwin screw job on Monday Night Football? That was glorious, by the way, that happened to them. But that was the time when all this was shaken down for me behind the scenes. So in detox, that was a very awkward couple weeks waiting to go to treatment because I didn't want anything to do with this. I thought I could be just fine the way that I am. Being the drinker, I'm doing okay because I haven't crossed over into hard drugs. You will find if you are the alcoholic or your husband or your wife or your kid is an alcoholic, they are full of those types of rationalizations, and that's what I had. I don't do drugs, I just drink, therefore I don't have a problem. So I was real snobbish about having to go to treatment. I thought if I ever decide that, hey, I'm going to get into pills or I'm going to snort something, then you'd have a leg to stand on to put me in some treatment facility. Thankfully, for the world's sake and ultimately my own, none of that mattered. Addiction was addiction, so I was shipped down to Yankton in this minivan. This cop drove me down there, and off to treatment I went. When I got there, I did not like it at all. Go figure. Once I arrived, everybody was there for meth and for opiates and all this shit. And I was like, is there anybody in here for alcohol? You look around and you think that your addiction, like, you're not as bad as these people. Eventually, I figured out that was incorrect, but it was a rough few weeks because I just didn't feel like I belonged there. And because I didn't want to be there, I just didn't really apply myself. I just went through the motions, tried to have a good time. On Sundays, we watched football, although I didn't control the remote and I couldn't watch the Vikings. This was the beginning of Adrian Peterson's MVP season. But I just kind of listened, kind of met some friends, thinking, all right, I will get out of here in my 28 days, and everybody will be proud that I took 28 days off. I had no intention of quitting my alcoholism, my drinking when I got there at all. It was just a pit stop so that once I got out, everybody would get off my back. That was my goal. Hey, Dustin got sober for a month. Let's give him a parade. And then my plan was to gradually let everybody down where, hey, I'm just going to drink beer now once I get back, folks, and then gradually get right back into whiskey. That was my half-cocked plan, one that it ultimately didn't come to fruition. But in treatment, there are a lot of folks that are like you that are stubborn and deserve to be in treatment. So what happened with me was we'd always have these pseudo AA settings, Alcoholics Anonymous, like quasi meetings. And I had that real just a mindset that I didn't belong there. It wasn't supposed to be me. So I built up that plan that I was going to gently relapse so I didn't hurt my mother's feelings, it didn't hurt my uncle's feelings, and then eventually I would probably move back to Minnesota where people wouldn't care whether or not I drank. And it was basically, I told myself, all right, it took me about 8 or 9 years to get bad enough to get to this treatment facility. The way that I see it, once I get out of here, I've got another 8 years. Like, I can start at the very bottom, start drinking beer, graduate, get my way back up. And I had fully developed that plan that although I knew I was going to drink again, I would try to do it gingerly as to not make a bunch of people mad at me. Well, the night that I formally hatched that plan, we had an actual AA speaker that came in to our Yankton treatment facility. And his topic that day was relapse and how your addiction allegedly does push-ups waiting for you. And I was like, what's this guy talking about? And he had hatched the exact same plan that I did. That it was really quite funny that when you decide to relapse, you jump right back into where you were. You don't start at the bottom of the ladder and work your way up. You get right back into the swing of it. And I was like, that was kind of one of the first seeds where this guy read my mind. And I was like, how could he have known that? He tried this? I thought I was special. That was one of the moments that it kind of clicked with me. But ultimately, the way that this worked for me, it's kind of a strange thing, and you'll have to follow me here. We got to my 28 days, and I thought I had faked it well enough. And I had a meeting with the director of the Yankton treatment facility, and she looked me dead in the face and said, "You haven't made any progress. You're not going to leave." And I'm sure I got combative or cocky with her. I was also really sad inside because I was like, I didn't do anything wrong while I was here. I just wanted to get the hell out. And she told me I had to stay longer. So what happened is I went back to my room, which was, I had a roommate there. And when I got back to my room that night, it was only about 7 or 8 o'clock, and I was tremendously sad because I thought I was about to leave this place, and my whole plan had worked. But they told me I couldn't, and when I got back to my room, I prayed. So I'm a Christian, and so I prayed to Jesus in this moment, but it was a real angry-ass thing. I told him, "This is your fault. You made me this way. You fix it, because I don't know how to quit drinking." I was incapable of quitting drinking altogether because that's all I did. That's all I knew. I had fears that once I didn't have alcohol in my system in the real world, I wouldn't be able to sleep, which turned out to be false. But I didn't know how to be a guy. I didn't know how to be a human without alcohol. So I blamed the powers that created me and said, "I don't know what you want me to do because I cannot quit doing this on myself. As soon as I get out of here, I want to drink. You made me this way. You fix it." And it was an incredibly sad night. I cried myself to sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, this is where it gets really strange. When I woke up the next morning, my entire mentality, how I looked at the world, how I listened to others, had changed. Normally, if you're an alcoholic, you kind of have this, I don't know, if song in your head, this tick about how many hours till I can drink again. And I had that every single day. But in treatment, it was, all right, how many days till I have until I can drink again? Well, that voice in my head, or that countdown, that drinking addiction song, that was gone. And I couldn't quite figure out why this had happened. So I went out into the main quarters with all the 20, 30 other people. And I wasn't annoyed anymore. The world just seemed like a brighter, happier place. And I didn't know what to do with this emotion, so I called my mother on the little treatment phone, and I said, "You know what, Mom, I think I'm done drinking." And she couldn't believe that, because even though she had heard me say stuff before about, I'll cut back, I'll switch to beer instead of whiskey, she never heard me as an adult and active alcoholic say, "I want to quit." So I told her, I think I'm done drinking for a while. And that was me trying to process the feeling of like almost euphoria that I was having, that the constant obsession to drink for that morning had been removed. And so I went throughout the day unusually happy, and I just started listening to what others had to say. And as it turned out, I never drank again. And I still don't know exactly like the exact sudden moment of where my body was cured. It obviously, I hope, had something to do with my really rude prayer that I had. And I have no doubt that it's a miracle from my perspective. But in treatment, you learn a bunch of coping mechanisms about, when you feel the urge to drink, you need to go eat chocolate or take a hot shower, take a cold shower, go for a walk when you feel that urge to drink. And when I got out of treatment, which was about 2 or 3 weeks after they told me I couldn't, I started to make progress and they couldn't keep me forever. I got out fully equipped and still with the mindset of, I'm feeling pretty good. I don't think I want to drink. But I was convinced that the temptations would emerge. So I had these coping mechanisms, get your bar of chocolate, take a hot shower, go for a walk when you feel like you want to drink. And my miracle is that those temptations, those triggers, never showed up ever again. If this was a daily battle for me, where I had to wake up every morning and not drink, I would lose every single morning, because alcohol for me is this absolutely superhuman potion that makes me feel like the best guy in the world, and it is more powerful than anything for me. So if I had to battle it every single day and white knuckle it, I would lose. So that's how I got so fortunate that the desire to drink was removed. If you are an active alcoholic, it's not going to work for you to quit drinking. You have to have an experience. A lot of times that's folks going to AA. Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he walked into a tree. That was his rock bottom. So it turns out my rock bottom was falling into a fireplace. But with there, a lot of times, if you go out to a restaurant and somebody says, "Hey, you want a beer?" and you're like, "No, I don't drink." They're like, "Oh, you don't?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. I quit. I don't drink." They do give you a lot of congratulations, like, "That's awesome, bro," and then they start telling you how much they drink. That's kind of just how it works. But it's always awkward for me to take congratulations for my sobriety because I didn't really do anything. I don't win a battle every single day. I didn't even win a battle back then. I just opened my ears and listened to what others had to say, and ultimately it was, cured by a higher power where I don't have the desire to drink anymore. So it's a tough thing to find a spiritual experience or to have that desire to drink to be removed. But if you can find that, that is when you know that the recovery can work. It's not a matter of not drinking. Anytime in the last 12 years, if I had to say, whoa, buddy, I'm not going to drink today, it simply wouldn't work because I would say, I'm going to drink. But I don't have any desire whatsoever. I don't, when we go out anywhere, I'm not like, a beer would sound good, or hey, that doesn't even cross my mind anymore. That's how far and lucky I am removed from this. So I got out of treatment. As it turned out, I was good to go. I never relapsed, but the state of South Dakota still owned me for 90 days. So I got out on Election Day 2012, hung out with my family for that day. Then I had to report that evening at a halfway house in Sioux Falls, a place called The Arch, at 8 p.m. And that was one of the most awkward days of my life because my family could see that I was different, and they actually believed that I think this might have worked. But to fulfill the involuntary commitment, I still had to go to a halfway house for what turned out to be about 2 months. And that was a rough and tumble place because that was drug addicts and folks who just got out of prison. But I got through that. You get a room with about 3 or 4 dudes, and then anytime you go out to have a cigarette or leave, you have to come back. You have to be breathalyzed to prove that you haven't drank. But the halfway house is just part of the story. I guess it built character. It was a good, I want to say 8 weeks there. And then when I got out, I stayed at my mother's place for ultimately about 9 more months before I got back into the real world. And when you get out on the outside world after you've had this experience where you're pretty convinced that you're done drinking, you kind of wait. Like, all right, when is this evil stuff going to show up? And for me, it never really did. And that's how I got so lucky, is that I don't have to fight this daily battle. There's a lot of misnomers about recovery if you're on the fence about trying this. You will get a lot of support from those that love you, especially if you're working a program of AA and you're making amends for all of the past bad stuff that you have done. You will get support. But it doesn't mean that life gets easy. In fact, it gets real hard because you're so used to falling back on the lies that you've depended on for a lot of your drunk career, or when shit gets bad, when adversity hits, you always wanted to drink to cope. And so you have to learn a lot of emotions over again. And you can't deal with them this time with alcohol or your drug of choice, because obviously that would be a relapse. So nobody's there to throw you a parade. Your bills are still waiting for you. And so I will give just some advice to those that are going to try recovery. Yes, you hopefully will have a good support system with the folks that you love you, but you have to kind of learn how to do everything again without alcohol or without your drug of choice, and that's not easy. So here I am 12 years later, as of Sunday. There's a couple other things that I want the advice that I want to give. I went through how I did it in terms of my drinking career. I was the real deal alcoholic, and then how my recovery story, that's what I just went through. Where I'm at now is I don't have any sort of desire whatsoever. I don't even, like, now that marijuana has become more acceptable, I don't even dabble in that, like, ever. I haven't had anything illegal or alcohol since I quit drinking, but marijuana seems so harmless these days. But because I'm paranoid, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want anything that's mind-altering because I'm so happy now. Why would I want to alter my mind? Ultimately, that is what alcoholism and drug addiction is about, is you're trying to get out of the mind that you're in. We always blame alcohol for the way that, we treated people, but it's really a symptom of you not wanting to be alone with your feelings or your mind or your brain, and therefore when you drink or use drugs, you get to a altered, like, state of reality. And I just don't have the desire to be anybody different or use any type of substance to make me feel different. Been there, done that. But there are two main themes that I want to touch on. If you're watching this and you're pretty sure you're an alcoholic, or if you've got an uncle or cousin or something like that, you, my friend, ultimately need to surrender for this to work. And I know it sounds like, oh God, how am I going to do that? But none of recovery, getting sober, none of that works if you're half-hearted about it, if you're going to do it half-assed, if you're just going to switch from whiskey to beer, or instead of meth, you're going to just snort a little coke instead, or maybe even just smoke marijuana. I'm not sure what the rules are there. But you can never be half committed. You have to fully surrender. So the thing about alcoholics and drug addicts, especially when they're drunk or high, is we think we have it all figured out. We know internally we don't, but we put on this facade that we have it all figured out, and you don't want help to even remotely fix your problem. But in order for you to find your rock bottom, of course, those are very different for different folks. You have to realize that the way you are actively drinking all the time, or the way that you're actively using, you have to realize that that isn't working. And therefore, you have to surrender. Now, this isn't going to be a lights flashing moment where, you bow down and say, oh, save me, God. It's not really how it works. But you have to get to a point where your ears are wide open and you are willing to admit that you have lost. And that is what I did with that very unorthodox prayer that I had that night when they wouldn't let me out of treatment. Had no clue I was doing it at the time, but I surrendered. I admitted accidentally that God and Jesus made me this way, and you need to fix it because it ain't my problem anymore. I didn't realize that that was a surrender, but once you go through a 12-step program, which I did, and you go to AA for however many years, you realize a lot in hindsight, and in that moment, I surrendered. So that is what, if you are a man or woman who is actively going through any sort of chemical addiction, I don't know how addiction works for like gambling or sex addiction. I don't know about those, but I can tell you from an alcoholic's perspective, you need to give in. You have to surrender in order for you to have a completely open mind and soul. You have to become clay for somebody to mold. It doesn't really do you any good to explore it, nibble at it, maybe go to a meeting just to see what they have to say. A good pal of mine of yesteryear, Mike Donnelly, always says, he's from Sioux Falls, he's an AA guy, says you have to be completely screwed for this program to work, thinking about Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why whenever I see a celebrity who gets sober, like Eminem or whatever, I'm always really impressed by that guy, because when you have all the money in the world, I don't know how you'd ever convince yourself that you have a problem, because you can just pay people to do whatever it is you need them to do. I digress. Yeah, you have to be in a really rotten spot to realize that your way has not worked. And in my case, it was drinking in excess to blacking out, 0.688 blood alcohol level every night. So find a way to surrender. You may not be able to do that alone. You might need the guidance of a spouse or a parent or a best friend to help get you there. But it won't work if you just kind of, I'm going to quit drinking, because you will be right back to it by day 2 or 3, because alcohol is way too powerful. And then the last thing that I'm going to leave you guys and gals with, you won't hear this very often because I never heard it. I've kind of developed the philosophy on my own. You are still, no matter how drunk or how sober that you are still the same addicted personality, same addicted son of a bitch that you were when you were drinking. What do I mean by that? Well, when you complete a program of AA, treatment, whatever launching pad gets you to prolonged sobriety, your personality doesn't fundamentally change. You are still an addict. And what I was never told in these 12 years, and I found out myself kind of through accident, is you're still going to have obsessive traits. The key is for you to find obsessions that won't kill you and that won't put you in jail. So I have some examples. For me, I found this career, this writing about the Vikings and the YouTube stuff career about four years ago. And in terms of writing, I can write about the Vikings as much as I want. I can write 0 articles per day, or I can write 20 articles per day. And I quickly realized that I don't really have a limit on this. And so I can feed my addictive personality into this job and then just write one thing after another. And nobody is harmed by this. I am not going to die of cirrhosis because I'm writing about the Vikings. I found a way, a somewhat productive outlet to just relieve all of my addictive tension. I can write like a madman, or in the musical Hamilton, like a man who's running out of time. I can write and write and write, be utterly addicted to something productive, and I'm not going to die from it. And so I think it is vital for the newcomers, especially to recovery. Don't completely shit on your own personality. Realize that you're still going to have those same addictive traits, but find ways, whether it's cooking or art or tattoos, or in my case, writing, find one of those productive ways to let it all out, and still you'll have those addictive things that just kind of show through, but you're not going to die from them. Another just teensy example is like you'll become like a subject manager on things. About a year ago, we bought another car so their dogs could fit in the back seat. Well, for that weekend, when I was researching SUVs, I became the ultimate addict on SUV research. I figured out everything that you need to know about them. And then by the time we went and bought that used SUV, the next Tuesday, I didn't give a shit anymore about SUVs. But for those 48 hours, I became obsessed with the details of what SUV we get. I'd figure out, does this one have a, third row seating? What's the fuel economy? So it's finding a way to channel your addictive personality that will not change, but finding stuff to do it productively. And that might sound like rah now. If you're watching this and you're drunk right now, how the hell am I supposed to do that? You'll find ways, because there's stuff that you're inherently good at. You got to find a way to pound that home. You can even monetize it like I did, but at least out of the gate, especially for those that are artistic, do whatever it is that you do, like a madman, like a fiend, because you'll feel that tension relieved, that you can use those obsessive and addictive qualities towards something else. So 12 years later, that is my speech. I don't think we'll do this every year, but I hope that it opens some of your eyes. If you have loved ones and family members especially, I will tell you this. don't ever give up on them. I know that an alcoholic will always let you down, and so will a drug addict and probably the others, gambling and all that. But we do this really odd thing in Western civilization where if you have an alcoholic that's in your orbit, they make your eyes roll. Oh, so-and-so is drunk again. He's in detox. And they become a pain in the ass and a nuisance. John just can't figure it out. He's drunk all the time. Gets on my nerves. I've tried and tried. Screw that guy. But when that same person dies from alcoholism, it's the saddest thing you can imagine. And we pivot to the, poor guy, I wish we could have helped him. So I will say, as somebody who lived this in living color, never give up on your loved one who is an alcoholic. Eventually, they might make it through. And if they don't, of course, that's a terrible tragedy. But at least you could say that you never gave up hope. I think there is hope for every single alcoholic. It's just whether or not we get to them in time. There's this adage that if you don't quit drinking, you're either going to end up in a morgue, in prison, and yep, that's why you don't see too many like old men alcoholics or drug addicts, because they all die before they hit age 70, blah blah blah, whatever it is. So yeah, don't ever give up. At least the love in your heart for your alcoholic, whoever that might be, because there is always hope that the message will get through and that person will hit rock bottom. All right, that's all I got for this alcoholism chat. We won't do it all the time. We'll get back to Viking stuff here soon, I promise. Skål, baby.